technical issues, but we'll have to move on and get started. It's a pleasure to welcome Arya Patil. She and I met each other virtually during COVID, actually, when I was doing an e-visit in Toronto. And so that's when, obviously, somehow she got somewhat inspired in being interested in astroseismology, but in broader terms. So Arya did her PhD there and then moved to Max Planck in Heidelberg, where she's LSST fellow, as I think I should call it. That's where she's now. And despite her title saying something about pre-whitening in astroseismology, her methodology is actually on the bridge between statistics and astrophysics. And anybody who deals with time series should care about this. And the screen is going to blink every now and then, but it's going to recover itself. That's how far we got. So, Ira, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me properly? Okay, perfect. Yeah, if the screen goes off, just wait for a few seconds. I'm Arya Patil. I'm an LSST Discovery Alliance Catalyst Fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Astronomy. And as Connie said, I'll be talking about beyond pre-whitening in astroseismology. I'll go over what I mean by pre-whitening later during the talk. But the idea is that I'm going to tell you about some exciting astrostatistics work that I've done on time series analysis. Yes. So this will essentially be anything that can be applied to time series analysis, as Connie mentioned. And I'll be focusing on how do we go from time domain to frequency domain in the best possible way. And I'll be talking about a new method that I've developed, which is on the topic of multi-taper power spectrum estimation, where power spectrum means the underlying frequency domain signal of a time series. I'll also be focusing on harmonic analysis and what exactly is the difference between power spectrum estimation and harmonic analysis, and how that helps us understand stars, the Milky Way, and beyond, focusing on massive stars towards the end of my talk. So why astroseismology? I know that there's a lot of experts in the room, but for those of you who are new to the field, and especially those of you who are wondering why I do astroseismology as someone who's a galactic archaeologist or likes to call herself an archaeologist. So can we look inside the sun? The sun appears to be a bright, giant ball of gas that we cannot directly look into, unless, of course, we want to get burned. But a few decades ago, it was found that the sun oscillates at several different frequencies, much like musical instruments. And this is because the interior of the sun includes a core, which is radiative, and an envelope, which is convective. And in these boundary regions, we get different types of oscillations. So essentially, gravity modes that have buoyancy as a restoring force, and then pressure modes that have pressure as a restoring force. Okay, sorry about that. Well, and what about other stars? We know that in high-mass stars, we have these regions flipped, and then we can essentially look at the gravity modes more dominantly, because they're going to be showing up in the outer radiative envelope. And this is what I mean by the gravity modes that should actually sort of help you look in the very interior right up to the core envelope boundary. And this is possible across the HR diagram. So we know that stars of different masses and stellar evolution show different types of oscillations. And so if we were to look at each of these oscillations and study the non-radial form of these oscillations, then we can actually understand stellar populations more generally, and this is what sort of got me involved in astroseismology. Now, what is the problem when we do astroseismology? Now I'm going to be talking to you as an astrostatistician. So how do we best measure oscillations of stars? We have time series data, which is going to show up soon. The x-axis is time. We convert this time series data to frequency domain signal, and this is what we call a power spectrum, the underlying frequency domain signal. And so we try to estimate that power spectrum. And we know for stars that behave like the sun, we should see a few different features. So for example, we have rotation peaks and harmonics showing up here in the lower frequency end. You have granulation from the convective zones. And then these acoustic modes are what I was interested in, because if you expand them, you see that these oscillations are almost evenly spaced. And if you were to first order, explain these using simple quantities, so delta nu and nu max, where delta nu is essentially telling you about the spacing between two oscillations of the same angular degree L. And then nu max is telling you where that frequency is, where you kind of get a maximum in this Gaussian distribution. And then these quantities are approximately sort of related to the density of the star and the surface gravity of the star, along with temperature. And essentially, that allows us to get a really good estimate of the mass and the radius of the star. And then from that, we can actually use models to get ages of a bunch of different red giants across the Milky Way galaxy. And we can go down to about 3% in mass and 10% in age. And this is what got me interested. How can we best estimate ages of stars across the galaxy? And this figure is going to show up a little bit during my talk. So now I'll be talking about the current methods and their limitations. So when you're doing time series analysis for astroseismology, you are dealing with the challenge of irregular sampling. This is something very inherent to astronomy. We cannot control our sampling in many cases. And to give you an example, this is a time series from Kepler. And as you can see here, there's a few gaps in the middle. And then if you kind of zoom into regions that look more or less evenly sampled, there's still some uneven sampling. And I want to highlight that this is going to be worse for, or this is worse for ground-based telescopes, and is going to be a big problem when we look at, so for example, LSST data that I am very interested in. And so we know that the Lomskargel periodogram is kind of used as a standard in astronomy to be able to deal with time series that have irregularly sampled data, because Lomskargel is a Fourier analysis method, but at the same time, it's also a least squares fitting approach. And so it kind of nicely combines both of these aspects to be able to fit sinusoids to your time series and then get you your frequency domain signal. But what we often overlook is that the Lomskargel periodogram is known to suffer from the two statistical problems of inconsistency and bias. I'll talk about what I mean by both of these concepts and how I worked on improving upon these concepts using multi-tapering. So I'll go into this multi-taper NUFFT periodogram that I recently published. So what does it actually do when I say that it improves upon inconsistency and bias? So let's say you were to take a Kepler time series and then imagine that you created two simple sinusoidal signals at the same time samples as Kepler and then applied the Lomskargel periodogram to it. What would you expect? You would expect two delta functions at the frequencies where you added the sinusoidal signals with the right amplitude. And the two frequencies I've added are intentionally very close to each other. And what you see is that instead of this true power spectral density, what you get from the Lomskargil is this black curve. This is in log space. And here you can see the same plot, but in linear space. And what you see is that where it's expected to be 0, there's a lot of variance. And then where you need to see the delta functions, you're actually getting leakage of power from one frequency to another. And this is sort of your classical problem of your time sampling actually showing up in your frequency domain signal. And it's kind of more clear here that you get leakage, and that could make you think that there's a frequency present here when there actually isn't. It's noise. And then what I did was, if I use a single taper non-uniform fast Fourier transform periodogram, I'll go over that in a little bit, what I find is that this leakage is removed. And so it's giving you that true signal in your data. And what do I mean by single taper and then now going towards multi-taper? So if you have the same time series that I've been showing you till now of a red giant, you apply tapers to this time series. These are called discrete prolate spheroidal sequences. I know it's a long term. They're sometimes called Slepian tapers. The idea is that they are optimally designed to reduce spectral leakage in your data, because they are essentially windowing your data so that the edges are a bit more smooth. And because you have multiple tapers that are sort of eigenfunctions, you can actually estimate the periodogram from these tapered time series and actually be able to average them, because they should be independent of each other. And then at the end, what you get is a signal that has lower variance because you're averaging multiple estimates, but at the same time has low spectral leakage. I'm not sure if that's mine. And sorry about that.
It wasn't only yours, we actually saw the message. You could show some on the screen.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't mine. And so if you were to do this approach, and yeah, so here what I'm mentioning is NW and K. So essentially here K equals 3 means I've used 3 tapers, and the number of tapers is usually defined by this NW bandwidth parameter. Now, how do we set this bandwidth parameter? So if at the top you're seeing the non-uniform fast Fourier transform periodogram, then on top of that you're seeing the multi-taper version of it. And what you're seeing here is that if you have NW equals 1, you're essentially having the same resolution as what you would get when you have the Lomskargil periodogram, the 1/t Rayleigh resolution, essentially. But if you increase the bandwidth, what you're going to soon see is that your resolution is going to get worse. You can use more tapers, so essentially your variance is going to reduce. So there's a trade-off between bias and variance. And you need to set this NW parameter depending on what frequency resolution you desire, or you know your sort of physics is informing that bandwidth. And then soon you're going to see the fact that multi-tapering is not a new concept. So back in the 80s, Scargill had published the original sort of Lomskargil periodogram paper, and in the abstract itself, he had suggested that we should use tapering to counter the difficulties that the Lomskargil has. But somehow that got a bit neglected. And then what had happened is that multi-tapering was really shown to be good for evenly sampled data. So if you have the classical periodogram in blue and the multi-taper in red, for a simple autoregressive process, AR4, you see that the multi-taper does really well. But the problem was extending multi-tapering to unevenly sampled data was hard. And so this is something that has been new. Back in 2020, my former supervisor and some collaborators worked on how do we combine multi-tapering with Lomscargil. And now I've gone a step further to say that we don't necessarily need the Lomscargil, because we could do the same procedure by using a non-uniform fast Fourier transform. And the advantage here is that the Lomscargil, because it inherently expects sinusoidal curves to be fit to your data, and we are looking at quasi-periodic signals. We are looking at transient pressure modes. And so can we remove that sort of assumption and just use the non-uniform fast Fourier transform? And that's what I'm showing you here. You have the NUFFT periodogram, and then on top you have the multi-taper. So now we're sort of combining both these concepts together. And one other neat thing that I want to highlight here is that because we have multiple tapers and multiple estimates, we can actually compute a confidence interval on our periodogram. So we don't just have the estimate, we actually have uncertainty on that estimate that Lomscargil doesn't necessarily provide. And so now let's look at how this works. Am I doing my statistics right? So if you were to do simple simulations of a solar-like oscillator, so here in black, I'm showing you the Lomscargil periodogram estimate of such a simulated time series. Orange is the true PSD from which the time series was simulated. And the green one is the MT-NUFFT approach. And if you see the whole plot, you see that the variance has clearly been reduced. But also when you zoom in, you can see that it's kind of estimating those frequencies a little better. And then I, again, want to highlight that this has to do with the fact that how when you estimate a multi-taper power spectrum, your uncertainty or your distribution in that estimate is essentially a chi-square with k degrees of freedom, where k is the number of tapers you use. So the Lomscargil has a chi-square distribution of 2 degrees of freedom, and what that means is that there's going to be a lot of estimates with really high sort of variance or uncertainty, whereas with the multi-taper, you're getting more or less Gaussian uncertainties on your estimate. And then you'll soon see that this has been applied now to actual data. And so here at the top, I'm showing you a Lomscargil estimate along with some sort of fits to individual modes by applying this simple peak bagging approach called PBJam. And then at the bottom, you're seeing the multi-taper estimate, and you can clearly see that it's kind of getting you the modes with much less variance. And we find that it has improvement in fit efficiency because the variance is low, so we find a 3 times speed up in using these sorts of Bayesian inference fitting methods. And we also find that there's improvement in both accuracy and precision. We're still working on quantifying those, how much there's improvement in accuracy and precision, because that's a little harder with real data. But the idea is that, yes, you're reducing the variance, but you're not smoothing the estimate. You're also reducing the noise or the leakage. So till now, I talked about pressure modes. Pressure modes are what we think of stochastically excited, intrinsically damped. So in the convective zone, you get these stochastic oscillations. They get damped over time, but then this process keeps going on. And so this means that your individual modes should actually look like Lorentzians rather than peaks in your periodogram, because they are not purely periodic. They have a little bit of a width. And this comes from the fact that you have, let's say, here I'm showing a simple sort of damped harmonic oscillator, and the damping will decide how much sort of width your estimate should have in the mode. But as I said before, there's very different sort of regions in the HR diagram where we can see oscillations, and some of them are actually expected to be purely periodic rather than damped oscillators. I apologize that you're going to have to keep seeing this, but okay, so you have your pressure modes, and as I said, you can see other types of modes. So for example, exoplanet harmonics should be more or less these square waves. I know this is a very simple assumption for them, but the idea is that you're seeing them more or less very periodically. And then with gravity modes, they are actually expected to be sort of really long lifetime oscillations and closer to periodic oscillations, purely periodic oscillations rather than P modes. And so this is where I get into harmonic analysis. The way that we define harmonic analysis in statistics is that it's the study of purely periodic oscillations as opposed to quasi-periodic oscillations. So it's slightly different from the concept of power spectrum estimation. And so here's what shows that if you have a strictly periodic oscillation, you're going to get sort of in the frequency domain, your peak, which should ideally be a delta function, but you get leakage. And then if you have a harmonic oscillator, you have a Lorentzian with a certain width. So how do we actually distinguish between the two is something that's hard to do with the Lomskargel, but what we did with the MTNUFFT is that if you have this estimate here of the red giant I've been showing you till now, you compute what is called the F statistic. So this F statistic is essentially a multi-taper F test, which allows you to test how purely periodic your signal is. So that's telling you beyond your power in the signal, how periodic or quasi-periodic it is. And then you can compare that statistic to an F distribution because it's a hypothesis test. And then essentially that gives you a p-value. And then from that p-value, you can do a few other things to be able to, so here you have the p-value. And then I'm going to skip over this part. This has to do with multi-hypothesis testing, but if you're interested, I can talk more about that. But what I get at the very end is that with no physics involved, I just told the estimate, give me the most periodic signals in this periodogram. And what we found is that 3 of these 4 oscillations that we get actually line up really well with exoplanet harmonics. So that's exactly what we were trying to target, and it was a nice result that came out. And so this is what I'm showing you. If you zoom into that estimate, so this is the power spectral density zoomed into one of the harmonics, and you have the F test. What this is showing you is another thing that when you do the multi-tapering, you kind of lose resolution because you're averaging. But then the F test is kind of allowing you to counter that resolution problem. And so the F test is actually really precise. And so this is the exoplanet harmonic I got, and then I compared that to this paper by Hala 2013. And the same thing was done with mixed modes as well. So one of the other oscillations that I found, I looked into it a bit more closely, and that also kind of really nicely aligns with one of the mixed modes, as opposed to the pressure modes that have sort of some sort of a width, a Lorentz. And even other modes that, so for example, yeah, these are these L equals 0 and 2 modes, and this one at the very bottom is, I think it's not working. And so, yeah, those were really interesting results. That goes to show that instead of putting your prior information, you could do this purely statistically and then see what you get. And so one other thing we tried to do was, with this harmonic analysis, we combined it with a chunk-based approach. So this is another nice statistical technique that you could do, that you could remove those sort of big gaps in your data, look at individual chunks in the data that probably have more or less even sampling, and then you estimate your multi-taper power spectrum for each of them, you compute the F-test for each of them, and then find that sort of exoplanet frequency. And what I find is that across the different chunks, it actually stays very stable. And another thing I want to highlight is that you actually get uncertainties on these F-test detections as well. And so what I'm showing you at the bottom is that this frequency that I get from each of these chunks is more or less staying stable. The pink region is the Rayleigh resolution, so that's showing you that the uncertainty is actually much less than even the Rayleigh resolution, sort of the base uncertainty that we expect in time series. And the same thing I did with P modes. I won't go into the details of this, but I looked at 7 different chunks, smaller chunks, to be able to see how the P mode changes, because it should be more or less periodic at shorter timescales, but over longer timescales, it gets more damped, gets more quasi-periodic. And so I found that this actually does vary across the different chunks. And then what about other stars? Now I'm finally getting into the massive stars. So one thing that I've been looking at, so Jenny, who's a PhD student at University of Toronto, working with me, is trying to test how well the F-test can do at getting you periods of RR Lyrae stars. So at the left, you're seeing the Lomskargil periogram. In the middle, you're seeing the multi-taper NUFFT. And to the right, you're seeing the statistic, the F-test. And we find that with the F-test, you can actually get a very precise estimate on the period. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to highlight here. With the phase folding, you can see that without any corrections, you can get the period really well. And this is because it's telling you what that exactly purely periodic signal is. And we tried this for a few different test light curves. And what I'm showing you here is towards the left, there's Lomskargil. In the middle, there's a few other approaches from literature. And this PIPS pipeline. And then to the right are sort of our approaches, the MT, NUFFT, and F-test. And as you can see that with the F-test, sometimes all of these issues that you get with different estimates, whether when you apply sort of the Lomskargil or literature values more or less without any correction, it can sometimes run into problems. But the F-test might be a way that we can automate this and get over these problems. And right now, we're looking at sort of how we can use these RR Lyrae to map our Milky Way. And we're also trying to look at maybe using Gaia data, where the time series is sparse, and seeing how well this approach can work for that, to be able to get metallicities from the period luminosity relation of RR Lyrae. And then, as I promised you, I'm going to talk a little bit about massive stars. This is sort of the most recent work that I'm doing. So it's still preliminary, but Connie and I are hoping to finish this up soon. And I also want to mention some of this work is being done by another student of mine, Nikki, who did the summer internship at MPIA last summer and still continuing this work. And she's applying for master's programs, so keep that in mind. And so what we tried to look at was, if we were to look at slowly pulsating V stars that show these gravity mode oscillations, so one example is shown here. And if we were to compute the Lomskargil periogram, as shown at the top in black, and the multi-taper NUFFT with some bandwidth and taper, you see that you have a lot of these oscillations, and at the bottom I'm showing you the F statistic. And there's a few regions where you see sort of a density of oscillations, and I want to highlight that with these modes you expect sort of individual single gravity modes, and then there's also some resonance that's happening, and so there you're seeing some combination of these frequencies. And so the idea was that, can we use the F-test to tell us which of these oscillations are more or less purely periodic? Can that tell us more about the excitation mechanisms as well? And can that help us get those frequencies well? And so if I were to apply a very simple sort of P less than 0.005, so trying to be very conservative in the F-test, and then look at the frequencies that I get, and then compare them with this 2021 paper by Van Beek, where there are 5 different pre-whitening approaches. We do see that we are a little more conservative in the frequencies that we get, but these frequencies should be sort of more or less purely periodic of all the different frequencies. And so, yeah, we find quite a few matches. And then one extra step that I did here was to go beyond one single p-value. I could use different p-values and then focus more on dense regions in the power spectrum so that I can kind of get rid of the noisy parts and then focus on where that dense region is and then get more modes in that dense region. And then finally, what we are getting at the moment is that if I compare the estimates that I get for frequencies with one of the methods in Van Beek that has been shown to work really well, which is the method 3, I remember. And what I get is that the match between my frequencies and the ones in that method, when I look at single frequencies, so single gravity modes, is on the order of 70% or so. And I've looked at different types of these slowly pulsating B stars. So there's high FSV, which is basically sort of these modes have been really well estimated in Van Beek in terms of the variance and capturing that variance. Then the low FSV stars are essentially what we distribute into high mode density and outbursting. So outbursting stars show like these outbursts in the time series that are hard to sort of capture in the Kepler light curves. And so what we find is that especially for these stars, the F-test gives sort of lower percentage of matches, and that could probably be because these oscillations might be more quasi-periodic than purely periodic. So that's something we're trying to look at. And I also find that when I look at combination frequencies, there's very few that my method detects. So maybe these combination frequencies do have some sort of shorter lifetime. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but that's something interesting to look at. Okay, and I'm coming towards the sort of end of my talk, and I want to hopefully try to convince you that this work has been done with Kepler, TESS. Some of this is being applied to Gaia right now, but there's a lot to be done with upcoming missions. So with Plato, we're going to get sort of the next generation of long, fairly quasi-evenly sampled time series. So this would be sort of a very good avenue to try multi-tapering. But there's also LSST, which has a different set of problems. So with LSST, you're going to get time series that's across different filters. So you have 6 different filters, and the time sampling of each of these filters is actually slightly different. So you're not getting sort of 5 measurements at one time. You're getting 2 measurements, maybe here and there, then 2 from one filter. So that's a complicated problem. How do we combine these multi-filter, unevenly sampled time series into one statistical model? And looking at these sort of variable stars with LSST is going to be really interesting in the first few years of the survey, because if you look at this sort of simulation of new variables per day with LSST with the elapsed survey time, we expect that within about 2.5 to 3 years, you should have mapped all the variable stars. And so that's kind of what could be targeted very early on in the survey, whereas certain different science cases could be sort of more later during the survey. And then, of course, I'm interested in how this goes to galactic archaeology, but also I want to mention that this does not just have to be limited to astronomy. So actually, a few months after we published our paper, we saw this paper come out, which is from the Mayo Clinic in the US, where they actually applied MT and UFFT to look at sort of implantation, biomedical applications. So this goes to show that there's actually a lot that can be done because it's a fundamental time series analysis method. And if you want to apply this to your own data, I've put out a package on my GitHub. I'm still working on the documentation, sorry about that, but it should be fairly easy to import and apply to your data. And I want to ensure that I tell you that every method has its pros and cons. So if something doesn't work well, it's always nice to hear what is sort of the issue with the method, what works well. And the main takeaway is that here's the takeaway, is that we can do improved time series analysis using multi-tapering. Hopefully this should help us understand stellar oscillations in the Milky Way more generally. And there's a lot of future work, so I'm hoping to apply multi-tapering more generally to Kepler and TESS data. Right now I've worked with smaller samples of data to see how these things work. And of course there's a lot of work to be done with high mass stars, like does the FTESS really give us truly periodic gravity modes and coherent modes, which are long lifetime or even quasi-infinite lifetime. And actually Nikki is working on trying to get a sense of whether gravity modes have a time scale, and can we get that width in these gravity modes? Is that possible? And of course, I'm an LSST fellow, so I have to say LSST is coming up, and there's a lot that can be done with LSST. And here are the papers. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
This one doesn't want to work. Great. Okay.
Yeah, this is not working. Oh.
So I'm going to have to stand here and I will find some batteries to fix this. Thank you very much, Arya, for a very clear talk despite the technology working against you. If I can fix this very quickly, are there any questions? Otherwise, you can shout.
I think I can probably hear people.
Probably. Yeah. Joris?
Hi, thank you for the talk. Can you shed some light on why multi-tapering does a nice job? Because the spectral leakage is caused by gaps, and the tapering does not remove the gaps. So you still have them. So why does it help actually?
That's a very good question. So that actually has to do with how there's two types of leakage that work. So as I talked about the spectral leakage that's sort of very close to the mode, frequency here. So when you have the window, so when you have a time series from t0 to tn, you're looking at a finite length of the time series. So that itself is what we call a square window. And that square window causes spectral leakage that's close to your frequency that's present. So those side lobes that you're seeing, which is the Dirichlet kernel, is coming from the fact that you have a square window, not from the gaps. The gaps also cause a spectral leakage, but the gap spectral leakage is actually further away from the frequency. So because of that, there's sort of two kind of spectral leakages that we have to tackle. The tapering tackles the windowing problem. The tapering is essentially removing that sort of edge effect in your window. And that's tackling the nearby spectral leakage. And then there's actually a lot of approaches that you can apply to figure out how to remove leakage with the gaps. That's a separate problem that I'm also working on right now. But yeah, that's a very good question in terms of why multi-tapering works.
Sometimes the alias is a bit higher than 2 simply because of noise. How does it react on that?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sometimes the alias is a bit higher than the 2 because the alias
Yes,
is higher
yes.
than 2 because of noise. How does the multi-tapering deal with that? Does it correct it somehow, or does it still give that the alias is the highest?
So it should actually, so if you have a true peak and let's say you have a lot of noise and the aliasing, it should reduce that aliasing but keep the true signal, ideally. So it won't, as I said, it won't fully remove the leakage because the more unevenly sampled you get, you could run into some problems. But the idea is that with Kepler time series, with those quasi evenly sampled time series, we find that it reduces that aliasing effect quite a bit. And so you should see the true signal dominating much more, the percentage of that true signal dominating more, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think, yes, I managed to fix it. So, Paul?
Sorry, could you go to the slide where you explain the tapering? Because it's a bit of a follow-up question to the one before. Because what you call it leakage, but I think that's not really a correct term, because what you just described is exactly what happens, right? It's the finite length of your time series. And so that gives you a high frequency edge at the end, at the start of your time series, and that introduces all these high frequency components. So I'm wondering, basically, if you have this taper, you're suppressing the amplitude of your signal towards the edges to soften the edge transition. Now, instead of tapering, of course, you could do padding, right? Where you extend your series on both sides, either by zeros or ones or averages of your flux, or with a signal where you actually sort of soften the edge outside of your observed window. Because what I worry about is that if you do a taper, then you're basically suppressing the amplitude of the oscillations of your signal towards the edges, especially if you look at your first one, NWS2K0, that's actually, if that's the same length as your time series, which I'm interpreting the bottom scale at, that's quite a window that you're suppressing your signal over, and only towards the center of your series are you actually at full power. So you're throwing away information. That's basically what you're doing.
Yes, but that's exactly the reason why we're doing multi-tapering, because as you see with the other tapers, you're trying to kind of counter that a little bit.
Yeah, but you're not countering it, because you're suppressing the noise at other frequencies, and therefore you have a multi-frequency approach, and therefore you're trying to suppress everything a little bit. But the basic doubt I have is the same, is that you're actually not using all the information that's in your light curve. So I'm wondering if you could, if you did an approach where you actually extend the light curve and then taper that bit to soften the edge effect that you have. You always have, right? I mean, it's the same why point sources in telescopes are not point sources, but show exactly the same frequency. I mean, mathematically, it's exactly the same. So that was my question. And then my, oops, your battery will shut down. And then my recommendation is, if you go to the RLI race, if you have the results sheet on your RLI race, where you show that your f-test is much better, you're trying to convince us by showing a light curve that is smoother, right? And so that could be quantified as well. And also the period that you derive, of course, should have an uncertainty on it. It's not just that the light curve is smoother, but the period should be better determined. And there, a recommendation is to look at a paper by Princey, who's sitting over there, where we actually developed a way to get a proper period uncertainty analysis on these kinds of analyses. And so to do this, finally actually get proper uncertainties on derived periods. So that's the recommendation, but the question is the first one. Sorry, this was very long.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And actually in the paper, I do talk about sort of comparing to these padding approaches, and there's a little more detailed analysis of how this works. But the padding also integrates some noise and aliasing within your time series. So then you are kind of posed with the problem, how do we tackle that extra aliasing that we get? And is it really that you're just going to, basically the edge effects come, here you're reducing the amplitude, yes, with the tapering, but you're not completely removing it. And also, as I said, if you use multiple tapers, and ideally if you use an infinite length of tapers, you're finally getting to that true amplitude, the high amplitude. So the more tapers you can get, you can tackle this problem, and that's exactly why multi-tapering came about. And what I'm trying to say here is that you're not just relying on the multi-taper, in the sense that what I'm trying to show here is that it reduces that spectral leakage to give you that estimate, maybe there's a little bit of information loss, which we know is happening, but you can trust your signal much better. Whereas if you're just using the Lomskargil and you're having the leakage, then your false positives are harder to tackle. So this is basically telling you how to get those false positives better, and also use multiple tapers, and reduce that leakage in cases. And so you could also apply, for example, the Lomskargil, and you could apply the multi-taper, and if you're getting some extra effects, you could see like, okay, is this noise? Is this something that's loss of information? And the point is that because the taper doesn't necessarily go to exactly 0, you should get still some information even with those edge effects that you're getting. So that's the first part. That basically, yes, there should be loss of information, but it's more about sort of your confidence in the estimate. And then the second part with the RLI ray, that's actually interesting. I will look into that a little bit more. And we had this same kind of idea that with the F-test, you get these uncertainties and you get the confidence intervals. And so you also get uncertainties on the periods. So the idea was that, can we just throw in the F-test, which is a very efficient method? So there are maybe probably, like, for example, pre-whitening should be sort of more computationally expensive than the F-test. So the F-test might not give you everything, but it's efficient and it's a good starting point. What we are trying to say in that paper is that you could potentially just apply your F-test. It will give you something as quick as the Lomskargil. And then you could maybe counter that with other sort of more complex methods.
But do you get uncertainties on the periods that you derive?
Yes, yes.
You just didn't put them on the
Yeah, I didn't put them on the slide, but I do get uncertainties. Okay, okay, yeah, we'll put the uncertainties as well.
Okay, I'll give you a chance to plug your laptop in if you want it to.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Is there any other questions?
Sorry, I got distracted a bit.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Hey, Arya. Thank you for the talk. Very nice. Very excited. The statistical and data scientist in me is very happy. I actually installed the package and ran it, so it works. And I tested with a very bad case, maybe. It's a Gaia very sparse time series. The multi-taper Lomskargil does the job, but the new FFT, it struggles a bit. So my question is, what are the conditions to move from the multi-taper Lomskargil, from the Lomskargil to the multi-taper new FFT?
Yeah. So that's actually one limitation that you need to think about. So NUFFT works really well when you have quasi-evenly sampled data. So Kepler and TESS works really well with NUFFT because you're removing that sort of sinusoidal signal assumption within sort of the Lomskargil framework. But the reason why Lomskargil works so well with unevenly sampled data is exactly that. It's easier to do, it's easier when the Fourier approach is combined with a least squares approach, like in Lomskargil. Right now, I'm actually doing some tests to see what's that sort of optimal boundary between where M2 and UFFT works well, and how unevenly sampled do you have to get before Lomskargil is sort of the way that you have to go. So yes, that is one thing that is going to be something that I'll have to test, which is why I mentioned that with really unevenly sampled data, the non-uniform fast Fourier transform, which is a very fundamental sort of way to get the fast Fourier transform, does run into issues. We know that.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be actually a very good test case for me if you could show me those light curves.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is that about the multiple bands. So, there is already for some time a multi-band Lomskargil that is just least square on all the bands at the same time. So it's principled, not very efficient, but it does the job. And actually, for the LSST case, it's even better because when you have when the times are different, then the aliases in the individual bands are different. So so the multi-band, the combination is more robust. So, but the question is, given that there is already a multi-band Lomscargle, can you apply the multi-taper on that? Or is not as a straightforward?
So that's what I said with the MTLS. So we have both the multi-taper
yes.
Lomscargle and the multi-taper NUFFT. And the idea is that we're trying to see at what point do you sort of let go of the fact that you want to get quasi-periodic signals really well, which you can do with the NUFFT slightly better. But at some point, as I said, you're going to have to switch to the multi-taper Lomscargle. And in the package, you can apply both multi-taper Lomscargle and multi-taper NUFFT. And when I did that, the idea was that, yes, I want to be able to, this is a limitation of NUFFT. And at some point, you would have to go to the multi-taper Lomscargle.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have a question. It was, I think, around slide 36, 37. You mentioned that you choose your NW parameter depending on what kind of physics you're interested in. Could you maybe give an example of from one of your works that you have been showing, what were you probing and how it informed the choice of the parameter?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I didn't get to spend a lot of time on it, but that's exactly what I wanted to show here is that with the Lomscargle, yes, you have a bandwidth NW equals 1, which is essentially, let's say, your Rayleigh resolution 1 over T, the baseline, the total time of your data. And statistically, we think of this as sort of the limiting frequency resolution where you can trust your signal. But as I said, with this bias problem, yes, that's the limiting resolution, but at the end of the day, you're still going to be affected by noise, and you don't know how it's being affected. So with this NW parameter, what the point here is that you're making sure that the leakage is within that NW bandwidth, and outside you're removing that. And so you're going to get local bias, which is why your estimate starts becoming a little more boxy. So that's something we expect. But the idea is that you can trust your signal much more outside it. And so one way that I found this works well is that you could apply different NWs, see sort of, if I use NW equals 1, maybe I'm using only one taper, and going back to the loss of information problem, maybe you're losing something there, maybe you're using more tapers, you're trying to see how your estimate varies over different tapers and different bandwidths. And the idea is that here you can actually clearly say that, okay, my leakage is limited to this NW. So it's giving you a little more confidence in your frequency resolution. And let's say you knew that your pressure modes were evenly spaced with some delta nu. And then you used an NW that's smaller than that, so kind of being informed by your prior information from physics, then you can at least say that, okay, I trust my signal within this bandwidth. And then you can try to get a better estimate of those frequencies. So yeah, that's why I wanted to say that it's not like a method that just will work with everything, but you have some control over your leakage with these parameters.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to have to pause there, but I know that Aria is around for the next couple of days, so we can thank her again for her very lovely talk.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and see you next week.